In no particular order, I'd like to acknowledge the following Chabad centers for their participation in hosting this event. Chabad of the Valley and Rabbi Mori Einbinder, Chabad of Larchmont and Rabbi Mendel Kunin, Chabad Persian Youth and Rabbi Herzl Pe'er, Chabad of Century City, Rabbi Tzemach Kunin, Chabad of Hancock Park, Rabbi Reichik, Chabad of Beverly Hills, Rabbi Yosef Schusterman, Chabad of Malibu, Rabbi Levi Kunin, Chabad of Hasidic Palisades, Rabbi Zushi Kunin, Chabad of Brentwood, Rabbi Baruch Hecht, Chabad Israel Center, Rabbi Yemini, Chabad Beis Betzalel, Rabbi Moshe Levin, Chabad of Sola, Rabbi Avraham Zayitz, and West Coast Chabad under the leadership of my esteemed father, Rabbi Baruch Shlomo Kunin. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and we're looking forward to a meaningful and inspirational evening. Many of us can remember exactly where we were on that day of Gimel Tammuz, the 3rd of Tammuz, 24 years ago, when our world, as we knew it, as shluchim, emissaries, Hasidim, followers, and lovers of the Rebbe, was shaken to its core. 24 years later, the Chabad army, the Rebbe's army of emissaries, has more than tripled, and Chabad and the Rebbe's mission to transform this world and bring about the world of Mashiach has expanded beyond anyone's imagination. Here in Los Angeles and in California, we are blessed to be the 3rd largest concentration of the Rebbe's emissaries and Hasidim on the face of the earth, behind, I think, only Israel and New York. So that's a great privilege and responsibility. As we sit here tonight, many tens of thousands of people all over the world are marking this special day, the Rebbe's Day. Many thousands are en route on airplanes to New York to spend these days in the presence of the Ohel, the Rebbe's sacred place. And here in Los Angeles at this unique event, which is a special unity event, it is our opportunity to not just honor the Rebbe, but to recommit ourselves to the Rebbe's mission and to complete the goal that he placed before each and every one of us to bring an end to the darkness of this exile. To begin the evening, we are very honored and grateful to have with us Cantor Chazan Yanki Lemmer, who flew in all the way from New York this morning, where he is the Chazan at the Lincoln Square Synagogue in Manhattan. And he has a flight back tonight to New York, where he will be back there for Shabbos. Yanki mentioned to me when he came today that his entire synagogue, which is one of the largest in New York City, only exists because of the Rebbe. And he gave me some more details from the history of that synagogue, but he wanted me to express that so we all can appreciate, as we do, the incredible impact the Rebbe continues to have around the world. And with that, please welcome Chazan Yanki Lemmer.
Yeah.
Yankee, and we will, a little later in the program, hear from Cantor Chazan Yankee again. And again, we're grateful for your joining us tonight. Sama Lacha Nafshi, the words of the melody just performed by Cantor Yankee, are ingrained in many of our souls and memory as we, for years, watched and continue to watch the Rebbe sing that tune, which expresses the great yearning and thirst of the soul to connect with Hashem in a meaningful way. And tonight we share that same thirst and yearning to our Rebbe. And we, as we commit ourselves to his mission, to each and every one of us, we also feel a great void that we fill with our pursuit of that mission. On a personal note, just a few days before the Rebbe suffered his stroke on Chav Zayin Adar, the 27th day of Adar, 26 years ago, my brother Rabbi Yossi and I had the great privilege and merit to join many thousands of people that were receiving a dollar bill for tzedakah, for charity, and a blessing from the Rebbe. On that particular Sunday, Rabbi Kunin, my dear and esteemed father, had called us on a reserved line from Moscow, because you couldn't just call, you had to make a reservation to make a phone call. And he gave us a specific request for a bracha, a blessing, to ask of the Rebbe. And as we came to the Rebbe, I had the written words of that request, and the Rebbe, before allowing for me to recite those words for my father, stopped us and gave us both an additional dollar and said, "Please give this to your father with my blessing." And knowing that he's on the line from Moscow and he had a very specific request, when the Rebbe concluded his blessing, I proceeded to repeat Rabbi Kunin's blessing request. And the Rebbe listened and smiled and said, "Tell your father, soll sagen dem Taten, als ich hab gesagt, ich hab gegeben die Brache nach jeder, wie du es mir erzählt davon, weil ich hab Bescheid gewesen, als Mastame wirst du beten der Brache." And for those who are Yiddish challenged, the Rebbe said, "Tell your father that I blessed him even before you asked, because I knew that you were going to come and ask a blessing for him." We are very truly blessed, myself personally and my family, to have our dear father and mother, and may our mother have a refuah shalema, Adol Miriam Bas Blum Aleha. And here, especially in California and on the West Coast, and indeed worldwide, Rabbi Kunin has set the example of what it is to be a shliach of the Rebbe, dedicated day and night to fulfilling the Rebbe's mission. On the day of Gimel Tammuz, at the Ohel, when the Rebbe was brought to what is his resting place today, many thousands of people walked and took whatever car you could find to get to be there for that moment. And I was actually on the wall of the words that were recited at that moment on that day were the oath that Rabbi Kunin took on behalf of all of the Rebbe's shluchim, Hasidim, emissaries, and followers, and Jews worldwide, where he vowed and promised to the Rebbe that all of us will continue to do the Rebbe's work, to not close any of his institutions, but on the contrary, to expand and grow them, and to bring about the moment that we are all waiting and expecting, the coming of Mashiach. It is my great honor to introduce and welcome my dear father, the director of Chabad on the West Coast, Rabbi Baruch Shlomo Kunin.
In order to be able to try to do some justice to this moment, I wish to start by telling you. I was an 11-year-old kid from the Bronx, whose parents and grandparents were followers of the Rebbe. We were walking into his room. The Rebbe charged us what to do. And so my life began that way, many, many years ago. And then from there, 52 years ago, the Rebbe said to come here. Only one Rebbe could understand this, because everybody else had a good laugh. Ha! Do you speak English? But our Rebbe said, go spread Chabad across the West Coast. So you have to understand the fact that we have today 200 branches, and 320 young couples, all of us are young, doing the Rebbe's work. It's one Rebbe, you understand? One Rebbe who never ever left us alone. Because you see, no good daddy would leave his kid alone. So coming back from Moscow, miraculously, same day. And from there to the Rebbe's room, the last one in the room. And from there to the Rebbe's resting place, to his own. Came the question, what are we going to do? What will we do? Spill some tears, oceans of tears, wouldn't do the moment justice. What will we do? So when we came back from the Ohel, I told my wonderful sons, God bless them all, who were in New York, I said, the Rebbe wants us to go back to the place of Shlichus, where he sent us. That's what the Rebbe wants from us. And so we went, came back. I was sitting with my son Levi. We looked at each other, we started to cry. He says, come on, that's not what the Rebbe wants. Let's get into the car, let's start to drive. Somehow or other, we ended up in Malibu. And in the days, or close to the days of Shir, the first institution, since the Rebbe's physical passing, was opened, Chabad in Malibu. And then from there, we went more, stronger, because that's our Rebbe. We are never alone. We're not alone. Go. Open another Chabad house. Go. Get another Jew to put on film. That's what you could do for the Rebbe. That's what you could do for the Rebbe. The Rebbe says, tut je der Enger aus, was ich kann bringen Mashiach. Do what you could do to bring Mashiach. Don't sit and cry. Do what you could do. Put those tefillin on every day, even if it's for 1 minute. If you don't have a pair, check them with your local Chabad rabbi. And the ladies, to see to that every Jewish woman and every Jewish girl lights Shabbat candles. And every married Jewish woman should use a mikveh. The one in Brentwood is just incredible. With our son-in-law and our daughter, Rabbi Hecht and Rebbetzin Hecht. Chanukah. That's what you can do. Do what you can do to bring Mashiach. That's what you have to do. And you want to know something? Take a deep breath. There ain't no tears in the foxholes. Take a deep breath. We're going to do it. We're going to make it happen. We're going to open our eyes. And we are going to see, you know what we're going to see? We're going to see Moshe Rabbeinu with his whole generation. He never left them alone either in the desert. He wouldn't leave them alone. He didn't go to Israel. He was buried with them in the desert. Then you see the Rambam, big, gigantic turban on his head, and the rest of the folks of his generation, bringing them to the third base of Mikdash. And our Rebbe, the uncontested leader of 5,500 Chabad houses across the globe, leading us out of this, the last, the darkest of all the exiles, B'mheira B'yameinu, Amen. And now what I'd like to do is to introduce you to a beautiful video of our Rebbe. Ladies and gentlemen, the Lubavitcher Rebbe.
Working on it. Rabbi Greenberg is known around the world for inspiring communities with his powerful message and for his prolific writings. And we are very cherished to have him amongst the family of Shluchim here on the West Coast, and for his agreeing to come join us tonight. Please welcome Rabbi Dov Greenberg.
To be bar mitzvah, and his parents were wondering if they did a good job. They were wondering if they raised a mensch. What kind of job did they do? So they came up with a strategy. They figured the day of his bar mitzvah, they're going to hide in the living room. They're going to watch when he comes home from school. And on the living room table, the dining room table, they put 3 objects. They put a Bible, a Torah, a $100 bill, and a bottle of schnapps, Grey Goose. They figure if he comes home and he opens up the Bible and he starts to read, so that's a good sign. He'll be engaged Jewishly. If he takes the $100 bill, he'll go into business. He'll be a fine Jewish business fellow. But if he opens up the Grey Goose and he starts doing l'chaim, then they're in for a rough ride with their little angel. That was their strategy. And the day of the bar mitzvah comes, they're hiding in the next room. The child comes in, he opens up the Bible, he starts to read, he swipes the $100 bill, puts it in his pocket, opens up the bottle, pours himself a l'chaim, and so the mother goes, "Oh no, Gewalt!" So the father says, "What's happening?" And she says, "He's going to be a Chabad rabbi." I'm not sure why you're laughing at me. But certainly the Torah is a beautiful symbol of what it is to be a Jew, our Torah, and to introduce life, l'chaim, energy, joy, optimism into Jewish life, into the individual, into the relationships that people have, into our homes. It's a critical thing in modern times. And tonight we heard a lot about the Rebbe. I want to spend a few moments speaking about this one facet of the Rebbe. And that was, the Rebbe was a great leader, there's no question. But he was a great optimist. The Rebbe was a great optimist in how he viewed individuals, peoples, how a person should view themselves, and how we ought to view each other. And he had a certain optimism of how one is to view Jewish history. So, if time allows, I want to try to go through those three components of his teachings and see how and if they relate to us in our lives. We talk about the Rebbe being an optimist. In Jewish life, it's a bit of a challenge, right? The great Jewish singer who taught everybody how to sing Hallelujah recently passed away, right? Leonard Cohen, what was his last song? You want it darker, right? You want it darker. Dark isn't good enough. A bissel mer, a little bit darker, right? You want like a double scoop ice cream. Well, it has to be a little bit darker. It's like a Jewish melody. Or the Jewish joke I shouldn't tell, but I'll tell it anyway. Sam Cohn. His doctor calls him, he says, Sam, I have the results from your blood test. I have bad news and worse news. What news do you want first? So he says, give me the bad news first. So he says, the bad news is the results came back, you have 24 hours to live. So he tells him, Gewalt, what could possibly be worse than that? He says, I've been trying to reach you since yesterday. So that's Jewish positive thinking, you know. It's not always in our community that we have a sense of optimism and joy. It's a challenge. And so to the Rebbe's teaching first about how we view ourselves. And there are many teachings, but I'll try to give one example of each category. So here's the first famous episode. The Jewish people experienced the great revelation at Sinai. Leave Egypt, surrounded by miracles, and moments later, they build and create and worship a golden calf. God is outraged. He's really upset. And God says, after everything I did for you and continue to do, this is what you do? You build an idol? And God's very upset. He wants to abandon the Jewish people. And God says, V'hine, and I have seen this people, V'hine am ksherefu, stubborn, stiff-necked people. You have everything to be thankful for, every reason for gratitude, and this is how you express your thanks. Stiff-necked people. So I'm going to abandon the Jewish people. He's very upset. So Moses argues with God to forgive the Jewish people, and here goes perhaps the strangest argument in all of Jewish literature, certainly in the Torah. Moses tells God, God, what you say is true, but here's the reason, and here's the argument why you should give the Jewish people. Moses says, God, forgive the Jewish people. Why? Ki am kshei orafu, because they are stiff-necked people. They're very stubborn. Therefore, forgive them. And God thinks about it and says, Moses, you're right. I'm going to forgive them. Yelech na b'kirbeinu. I'm going to go amongst them because they're stubborn. And in fact, we say it on Yom Kippur. Every fast day, the whole congregation sings these lines as if it makes sense. Right? Try that in a court of law. Police officer, I went right through the stop sign. And my defense is, I went right through the stop sign. Okay. When Alan Dershowitz says the definition of chutzpah, the Harvard lawyer, he says the definition of chutzpah is that child who kills his mom and dad and in front of the judge pleads for clemency because he says, I'm an orphan. Right? So he says that's a definition of chutzpah, but not exactly with that chutzpah. But in a strange way, Moses turns to God and says, forgive the Jewish people, ki am ksherefu. What is the possible meaning? The commentaries have very interesting, wonderful answers. Most of them go along the lines as if Moses is saying, look, they have a problem. You got to cut them some slack. You know, a child that is hyper. The teacher first throws him out and says, this kid has some hyper issues. Oh, it's a challenge in California, whatever. You know, okay, fine. So most of the commentaries explain it that way. But here goes the Rebbe's interpretation. I find it beautiful and moving. This is how he understands the argument. Moses turned to God and said, God, the Jewish people are indeed stubborn. They have every reason to be grateful and they're not, because they're stubborn. But today, what is their greatest vice will tomorrow turn into their greatest virtue. They are stubborn. And they were in Egypt, a bad environment for centuries. And they were around idol worship, bad environment, terrible place. And they're ungrateful because look where they're coming from. And they're a stubborn people, so they're still trenched in those ways of the Egyptian ways. So they have miracles, but they're stubborn. They stick to their ways. Wait until you give them the Torah, Moses argues. Give the Jewish people the Torah. And then they will start organizing their life around the great moral virtues of the Torah. The ideals of kindness and love and generosity, forgiveness, the holiness of the mitzvot. And slowly their lives will change. They're going to appreciate the Torah and its values and its holiness in God. And then Moses says, the Jews are going to be very stubborn. But this time for you, God. They're going to be stubborn for Torah. They're never going to let go. So don't look out the vice right now for what it is. Look out into the future, God. Realize that they're going to take this vice and turn it into a great virtue. And for thousands of years, with tenacious audacity and stubbornness, the Jewish people did not bow. Mordechai didn't bow. Esther didn't bow. Because when you have a stiff neck, the one thing you don't do is bow down. For thousands of years, all that you had to whisper is a few soft words, and most of their problems would disappear. Mighty empires tried to destroy us, and we were stubborn. Powerful religions came and said, just say a few words and it's over. Your trouble is over. And the Jews said, absolutely not. We stick with God. When God heard that, the Rebbe argues, he said, Moses, you're right. I'm going to forgive the Jewish people, and I'll travel amongst them. I'm going to go and why? Steve Jobs, and there's a biography written about him by Isaacson, Walter Isaacson. He tells a pivotal story. He was a child. His biological parents were not the nicest people. They got rid of him when he was a child. His adoptive parents, wonderful people, kind, sweet. They never told him his story. He's 9, 10, 11, blissfully unaware of any issues, living a nice life. Steve Jobs said his neighbor in his block, we got into a fight with, knew his real story, and she was so angry at him, she said, I want to tell you something. He says, in those moments, my whole life crumbled. She says, you were discarded by your parents are not your real, the whole story. And Steve Jobs said he remembers that day, because the moment she started to tell him these things, many things clicked. He realized what she was saying was true, instantly. And he said, I sat down, I didn't go into my home, and he began to cry and weep for a very long time. Devastated. His world fell apart. He felt horrible. His mother realized what happened. His father realized what happened. He was outside for hours weeping. They put the story together. They called him in and they told him one simple thing. They said, we want to tell you something. You weren't abandoned. You know what happened to you? He says, what? He says, you were chosen. We chose you. That's your story. That was a turning moment in his life. He attributes everything in his life to that moment. He says, because at that moment I promised myself that's my story. My story is not that I was discarded, but I was chosen. And if I was chosen, then I need to dedicate my life to showing my chosenness. And he influenced us. You hear he's still ringing in the room, right? So what was true? Was he discarded, abandoned, or was he chosen? What is the real truth? And the answer is, the truth is, whatever story you choose to be true is true. If he would have chosen to live a life of resentment and anger because he was thrown out, that would have been 100% true. And dare anybody to tell him different. But if you choose the story that says, I was chosen, then every event in your past life changes and your future changes. So we choose the story. The events were the same. The question is, what story do we tell ourselves? We all tell ourselves stories about our own life. The question is the story we tell ourselves giving us power to maximize our potential, our neshama, and our destiny? That's the question. What story are we telling them? So Moses turns to God and tells God, chapter 1, in the Jewish story ain't good. Am Kshei Erev, we're stubborn, we're sinning, it's not good. You're angry, I get that. You have every right to be. But God, this is not the beginning, it's our first chapter. In the decades and millennia to come, what is our story going to be? We're going to take this great vice and transform it into a great virtue. And that's what everybody can do. We can look at ourselves and we could have gone through horrible things, tragedies, painful experiences, horrible abuses, all 100% true. But what are we doing with that story? That is in our hands. And so the Rebbe saw this in the text of our tradition, in the great story of the Jewish people, as they left Egypt, but he applied it to individuals constantly. This perspective resonates throughout his insights into Torah for 40 years. I mean, Moses also has a biography written by God. What was Moses' story as a child? Moses was brought up in an Egyptian home. He spoke Egyptian. He dressed like an Egyptian. He walked like an Egyptian. He was brought up in Egyptian culture, the palace of Pharaoh. He was born Jewish, but he wasn't raised Jewish, like most Jews today. Born Jewish, not raised in a Jewish environment. So what was Moses' story? Who was he? Was he a Jew or was he a prince of Egypt? Torah says one day he walked out and he saw Jewish people being brutalized. And at that moment he had a decision to make, what his story would be. Am I a brother and sister to the slaves? Am I a slave? Will I fight their cause? Am I a Jew or am I an Egyptian? And at that moment, Moses said, I'm Jewish. And I'm going to leave the palace and I'm going to go fight for the Jewish people. It's going to be a hard battle. But that moment in Moses' life changed his whole story. It changed his story and it changed ours. Because Moses looked at his story a certain way, we're sitting here tonight. If Moses would have stood on those steps and said, I'm the prince of Egypt, it would have been a very different story. The facts are the same, but what's the story we tell ourselves? Take this and apply it not to ourselves, but to viewing another human being. Specifically, we'll talk about viewing another Jew. A certain optimism. How do you view another Jew? How do you view a bad Jew? How do you view? A psychiatrist wrote to the Rebbe. You can see the letter in one of the early volumes of correspondence of the Rebbe. He was a Freudian, this professor of psychology, but specifically Freud. And he started to learn Jewish mysticism and the Tanya as well, the Chassidut. And so he wrote a long letter. But the point of the letter was, he says, Freud argues that if you probe the psyche of the human being, you find under the nice veneer dark demonic forces, the id. You find unhealthy impulses that are not expressed just because they're being repressed by environment or religion or community. But that's not really who you are. Really, it's quite ugly underneath, the id, much deeper. He said, I see in the Tanya the opposite. That the outside could be, you look at a human being, not a good human being, a Jew, you say, bad Jew. But the Tanya argues you dig deep into the soul and you find diamonds, beauty, spirit. You have to. So are these modes of thoughts, could you say they go together, or are they just two different viewpoints that contradict? And there's no way of putting them together. And the Rebbe's answer basically was like this. Just to summarize the answer, the Rebbe said, Freud, you look at a beautiful grass field and you see grass. And in the discussions, in Freud's time, people looked at human beings in a superficial way. And Freud brought to the conversation a depth. He started to dig under the green grass. And he started analyzing different colors of mud, clay, orange. You start digging, you find interesting things. So there is some truth. Dig under the grass, you find things. And Freud was digging into the layers of people, and he found certain things. But if you dig into the ground, it's true, you find mud and different kinds of mud. But if you dig deeper, you find diamonds, gold, diamonds. So the Rebbe said Freud dug, and he found the But if he would have dug a bit deeper, he would have found the Yid. He would have found the neshama. So he dug, it's the Yid, but deeper is the Yid. So when you look at another Jew, it's very easy to look at something external and condemn, or say bad, or not good. But it's a superficial approach, the Rebbe argued. When you go deeper, then you see a much deeper truth. I'll give you an example at Stanford University. It's reflective of Chabad houses across the world. But not just Chabad, but today, many who are involved with teaching the joys and depth of Judaism. And White Plaza is the center of the Stanford campus. So I sit there sometimes to advertise programs to meet new Jewish students that wouldn't come to a Chabad house or a Jewish establishment, against the majority of Jewish people, youth on college campuses. So sometimes I meet somebody, and right away they tell me I'm a Christian, and they have a question because they want to know. They're writing a paper about comparative religion, they have a question. I know, okay, it's a nice Mormon. They tell me they're a Mormon, good, it's a conversation. Sometimes it's an Episcopalian, and they'll tell me, I know, right away. Sometimes she's wearing a chai necklace. She wants to know a question about a Jewish holiday. Okay. And then sometimes somebody approaches, and I don't know. Jewish, not Jewish. Over here, I think in Los Angeles or in New York, it's like New York and Los Angeles. What does a Chabad person do if they want to know if somebody's Jewish? They ask. Well, you're Jewish. If you say yes, you start getting tied up with leather straps, and things happen right away. In Stanford, in Northern California, you could try that approach. I tried it, but it's not, it's right away, you're picking a fight. It's intrusive, it's provincial, you're right away. But I have to ask the question, I have to find out, what do I do? So I developed a tactic that never failed, it always works. During the conversation, I'll stop and I'll ask the student, by the way, what faith community are you part of? It's the same exact question. There's no difference. But that, okay, that's already, it's fine, it's kosher. It sounds politically correct. It's not hitting any triggers for some reason. Faith community in this thing. So if the person tells me I'm a Baptist, I know they're a Baptist. If they tell me Episcopalian, if they tell me I'm a human being, I know right away they're Jewish. So what faith community I'm a human being? I right away say, come for Shabbos, we have a Talmud class tomorrow, it's this in the afternoon. They say, Rabbi, how did you know I was Jewish? Are you a prophet? I told you. They actually never laugh. They always get a bit ticked, you know. Hi, Rabbi, how did you know? They think their mother texted me or something. How did you know I was Jewish? I said, you really want an answer? He said, yeah. I said, oh, I'm a Shugana Jew. Answers that way. Yeah, you have to be a certified Shugana. What kind of rational conversation was this? I asked you if you're, what faith community are you part of? You told me you're a human being. It's a non sequitur. So, I thought that you were a raccoon, and now you clarified that you're a human being. Oh, what kind of answer was that? What faith community are you a human being? That doesn't make any sense. So you can look at a Jew and you say, oh, this Jew is so assimilated, so far, they don't even want to say they're Jewish. Oh, that shanda. That's one approach. But that's not deep, and it's not true. It's simply not true. The reason why the Jew is not answering is because their Jewishness touches them in a deep way. And they don't want to say they're not Jewish. So even though they're coming from a home or environment, no fault of their own, maybe they didn't have any Jewish experience, and they were taught at a university or Stanford that you have to be a universal, intergalactic citizen or whatever, you know? You can't be tribal, you have to be universal. So they're torn. How, you know, should I connect to this tribe or not? But somewhere deep, the neshama doesn't want to say no. Despite all their teaching, I'm not saying I'm not Jewish. So you can look at the Jew and say, not a good Jew. You can say, this is the beauty of the neshama. Look at the preciousness of the soul. Never even stepped foot in a Hebrew school, but the neshama is strong, it's vibrant, it's not. So right away, it needs an invitation to Shabbos or to class immediately. And it works. So you can look at it, but that emanates from this perspective that the Rebbe taught, again, in many ways. I shared one example of this letter. Do we look at the Jew and look at the Id or the Yid? When we look at it, Yid, and we help nurture that Jew, then we have a different kind of Jewish community. And so all of you have been at Chabad houses. The Chabad house is a very strange place. Normally, if you go to the Mark Twain house, you'll find all things Mark Twain. If you go to the Pancake house, in Israel they probably have a kosher pancake house. If you go to the pancakes, you found the pancakes. You go into a Chabad house, the one thing you don't find is a house filled with Chabad people. What do you find in a Chabad house? Every kind of Jew, affiliated, every denomination, no denomination, atheist, every Jew. But that's the definition of a Chabad house. The definition of a Chabad house is where every Jew feels at home. But why? Why is the Chabad synagogue that way? Because when we view each other from a deeper, truer perspective, then it makes people feel comfortable because it allows that inner truth, that neshama, to feel at home, to feel Hamish. So that perspective does it. I mean, 2 weeks ago, universities ended. So I have my wife and myself, we direct Stanford University. I have another sibling at Lehigh, my sister at Lehigh, another university, another at Emory, and Muhlenberg, 4 different siblings on different campuses. 2 weeks ago, the other schools just finished 2 weeks ago, Friday night dinner. This is reflective of most weeks throughout the year. Between those 4 Chabad houses, there are 500 students. 500 students celebrating their identity, praying, studying Torah. 500 students. Now, the only thing that's extraordinary about that is that it's not extraordinary. It's the story of Chabad in the 20th and the 21st century. What do I mean? In 1969-70, my mom and dad were both secular. There were secular Jews on college campuses. Nothing. The only religion my father brought up with, what was raised with, was Pesach. They had matzah and a bread basket. They had a kind of, options. That was the only tradition they did. What kind of say? That was the. He met a shliach on campus in Maryland, 1969-70, and the guy said, "Wrap tefillin." My father said, "I don't wrap tefillin. Get away from me." The guy was a nudge. My father made a calculation. It's easier to get rid of the nudge by wrapping tefillin than fighting with him, so he put tefillin. But then the partial mitzvah program, one mitzvah and the next mitzvah. And my mom and dad, they met a bit later, but slowly they re-embraced their tradition that was in the family, but left for a generation or two. But, so that shliach, 1970, meets one student on campus, one pair of tefillin. But when you view a Jew a certain way, and you open the doors of the tradition to that Jew, and then they raise children with our Torah and our traditions, then the Jewish world changes. You go from one mitzvah, from one mom, one dad, to children, and we change the Jewish world. That's how it works. So it's that perspective of how you view oneself. What story do we tell ourselves? Optimistic. How do we view another Jew? Positive, optimism, see the neshama, be impressed with the mitzvah, the lack of the mitzvah, we work on it, but we focus on it. And that changes who we are, and it changes the Jewish world in which we live. Jewish history. We live in many ways incredibly blessed times, no question. First time in Jewish history where we have at one time opportunity and equality in the Western world, and we have a government and beautiful, endless opportunities in Eretz Yisrael and the state of Israel. Rarely in Jewish history, if ever, did we have both. We live in incredibly blessed times. That's part of it. But we all know that it's also quite difficult times. Israel in the last decade has been vilified and demonized. You all know, we don't have to go into it. Israel is a difficult neighborhood, and there's problems in Europe with the Jewish communities there. On campuses, the BDS, the divestment movement is growing, it's powerful. So, and assimilation is, the statistics. So there are incredible blessings in the environment and the times in which we live, but when you look at Jewish history, there's also a dark, gloomy picture out there. So how do you view Jewish history? What is a perspective? And here I would like to share with you, but we'll conclude with this, a perspective, a beautiful, optimistic perspective in terms of Jewish history. It's realistic and optimistic. In 1942, literally in the middle of World War II, that dark moment in Jewish history, the Rebbe's cousin was about to be bar mitzvah, and the Rebbe wrote him a letter. In the Rebbe's private notes, after the Rebbe passed away, they found a few notebooks in his desk of private notes that he wrote over the years. Beautiful notes, a lot of them with letters, personal letters, beautiful Torah insights, great stuff. And they published, it took a few years, they published almost all of it. So this letter was in there. So here's the letter. He writes to his cousin, 1942. He says, you're about to be bar mitzvah. Bar mitzvah is a day of joy. But how is it possible to have any joy today? How does a Jew celebrate anything Jewishness when we're surrounded and being hounded and attacked? But a Jew needs joy. But how do you get it in a dark world? That's how the letter begins. So the Rebbe writes to his cousin, he says, let's go back to the first bar mitzvah in Jewish history. The first mom and dad, Abraham and Sarah. The first child that they entered into the covenant at 13, and that will give us an insight across time. So in the Torah it says, Vayas Avraham Yishtek Gadol, that Abraham and Sarah made a great party. The day Isaac became bar mitzvah. He was the first Jew to be born in a Jewish home. Because Abraham and Sarah came later on in life. So the first bar mitzvah is Isaac, Yitzchak. So the first big bar mitzvah, Yitzchak. What do we know about the bar mitzvah? We know the text says they Mishteh Gadol, they threw a big party. It was a big feast. So that one ancient medrash records what happened at that bar mitzvah. First of all, it says Mishteh Gadol. Why was it called a big feast? Because it says at that feast, at that bar mitzvah, Kol Gedolei Elam Hayasham, the great dignitaries and kings of the ancient world were all there. They all came. Especially Og. Og was a powerful giant of an individual. He was the most powerful king of the ancient world in the times of Abraham and Sarah, 4,000 years ago. He appears in the Bible many times. So Og was there at a table with a bunch of other kings. They all came. Abraham is famous today, but he was famous then too. So the Medrash says what happened, this table with all the kings, and Og was sitting. The other kings turned to Og and they started to laugh. They started to mock him. They said, Og, you went around for years, for a decade, and whenever somebody would put the question to you saying, what do you say about this new religion, Abraham and Sarah, Avraham and Sarah? They're teaching the world new great ideas, monotheism. There's one God creator who's just and kind and wants us to behave a certain way. It goes against everything our pagan culture teaches. What do you say about this new faith tradition on the block, Abraham and Sarah? So Og response for a decade always was, this Abraham and Sarah, they're impressive, but it's over. They'll never have any children. So the first Jews will be the last Jews. So the kings turned to him and said, Og, you are wrong. For a decade you said, they'll never have a child, and now we're celebrating the bar mitzvah and you're even here. So you're wrong. They began to mock him, the Medrash says. So Og at that moment looked at Isaac, the bar mitzvah boy, and he says, that child that God gave them is worthless, insignificant. I was right. The child doesn't even count for anything. The etzba ktana, with my small finger, pochish, I can crush the child. I'll get rid of him. I'll kill him with my small finger. He's so insignificant. So I was right. He doesn't count for anything. The Medrash concludes with these words, Ba'ishes Shah, at that moment, God's voice rang out in heaven, and God responded to Og's taunts and said, you mock Isaac. Your end will be that when you rise up in an effort to destroy him or his descendants, in that endeavor, you yourself will meet your end and they'll flourish. The words are, Chayecha, God says, I swear, Sha'ata tira elef alavim v'rivi revavis. You'll see many, many descendants. And the end, when you try to attack, you'll fall. So, the Rebbe asks 2 or 3 questions, and briefly these are the questions. Question 1, the simple question. The Rebbe writes to his cousin, this teaching of the Medrash is strange because it's 13 years late. If the dialogue would happen shortly after Isaac was born, it would make sense. Og went around saying they can't have a child, and they didn't have a child for many years. But if this dialogue happened by the circumcision, it would make sense. 13 years later, people are laughing at him, it's 13 years late. There's Jewish time, so it's a few hours late or whatever. 13 years late, that's already... But Einstein said he always tried to come late to a Jewish event, but he never succeeded. Right? But it's relative, I guess. But 13 years late, what what kind of discussion? The Medrash is hard to understand. What does that mean? Number two is, what kind of answer is that? It's one thing if you forget to bring a bar mitzvah present, that's one. But to threaten to crush the bar mitzvah boy by his own bar mitzvah, that's bizarre. What kind of response was that? What's the meaning of that? And, wrapping it up. And, lastly, the Rebbe says, it's a bit strange that the Medrash doesn't tell us what Abraham said or Sarah. It doesn't tell us what Isaac said. It only records what some anti-Semite said, that he wants to wipe out Isaac. And God responds. Very strange. This is Torah. And so the Rebbe says that this argument wasn't a simple argument. It's in the Torah and it's recorded because it was a defining philosophical argument between the Jewish approach to life and a different philosophy. And the argument at that bar mitzvah echoes across time till our time. Og represented the physical world, brute power, strength. Power makes right. The only thing that exists in life is the physical. The world is a random explosion, a coincidence. And you just live, grab what you could get, crush who's ever in your way, because tomorrow you're dead and it's all over. So Og represented the philosophy of brute strength, power, might, crush those who get in your way. That's it. And that philosophy appeals to many empires and kings till modern time. Abraham and Sarah represent the exact opposite. That life is about goodness and godliness, about being kind and justice and holiness and mitzvah. That's the essence of life. There's a good God, history has meaning, there's purpose. Two worldviews. So the argument it wasn't about a biological child. Og didn't care if Abraham and Sarah had a biological child. He argued something deeper. He said Abraham and Sarah figured out how to be spiritual in a physical world. It's a strange exception. It's an anomaly. The next generation, they won't have real children. Judaism will disappear quick. Abraham and Sarah come once every 1,000 years. That was his argument. And so no one said anything till the bar mitzvah. Suddenly the bar mitzvah, talented, capable boy, gets up and he says, I'm Jewish, and my mom and dad's way of goodness, of kindness, of holiness, to make this world the garden of God. That's the path I embraced. They said, you were wrong. They started to laugh. They said, we're celebrating the bar mitzvah. Don't you see Judaism has a future? So Oik said, no, I was right. You don't understand. I was right. Why? Because Isaac is brought up in the tent of Sarah and Abraham. That's a shtetl. It's a Jewish environment. It doesn't count. Of course he's going to choose Judaism if you're born in Crown Heights or Mea Shearim, in the tent of Abraham and Sarah. But wait until he gets under the pressure of my finger, the physical world, California, Beverly Hills, campuses, Western culture. Wait till the Jew leaves the shtetl and then Judaism will disappear. My small finger, the small pressures of the world will crush the Jew. And the Rebbe says from that time till our time, often great powers in the world, the Greeks, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Romans, all got up and they said the same words Og said. We will crush the Jew. Sometimes they said we'll crush you physically, sometimes spiritually. They all made the same argument. In the 20th century, the Third Reich and Communist Russia said the same exact thing. We're going to wipe the Jew off the map. And others, you turn on the radio today, and you'll hear people from Iran saying the same words Og said, the exact words. We're about to create the capacity to use nuclear energy. And what are we doing? He said it this week. What are we going to do with our nuclear energy? The Etzka Batana with a small finger will push one button and will wipe Israel off the map. We'll get rid of the Jews. Same language, 4,000 years later. So the echoes of Og go from that time till today. And if you turn on the radio, you hear many Jews say the statistic, the Jews were disappearing, Og's going to win. And with this we conclude, the point was, that the Rebbe told his cousin, that all of those empires, they're gone. They're gone. They're in the dustbins of history. But the Jewish people, the children of Isaac, who embraced God's viewpoint of reality in the world, ultimately not only did they survive, but they became stronger. Those nations that tried to destroy the Jew fell in that endeavor, and we march on. And the Rebbe told his cousin, be optimistic because we're going to win this one too. You have to have inner strength, but to be a Jew is to have inner strength. That's the way to view our story. And friends, I'll conclude with this, and that is, we have 3 holidays on the Jewish calendar that very much revolve around BDS, to divest from the Jew, to destroy the Jew, to assimilate the Jew. Passover, Purim, and Hanukkah. 3 holidays where the enemy said we're going to wipe the Jew off the map. Pharaoh, Greeks, and the Persians. What are the delicacies we eat on those holidays? On Hanukkah we eat donuts and latkes. Oily foods, usually foods that could kill people. So that's, Purim we eat jelly donuts called hamantash. Pesach we eat matzah and matzah balls. And we Jews think these are cute little traditions. Rarely do we stop and realize that these three Jewish delicacies all represent the three strongest empires in human history. Ancient Greece, ancient Persia, and ancient Egypt. The strongest, longest-lived empires in human history. And what did Jews do to those empires? We turned them into jelly donuts and matzah balls and hamantash. We turned them into a sweet snack. We rewrote the script. We rewrote the story. We make a blessing. To be a Jew is to understand that we write our story differently. And we look at a Jew and we say, your story is not that you're a Eid, but you're a Yid. We look at history and we know that if there's one lesson to learn from history is a Jew has every rational reason to be optimistic. And so, ladies and gentlemen, very soon, there's no question, we'll have in the Jewish calendar a new delicacy, a Ahmadinejad waffle or something of that nature. So let us write beautiful stories for ourselves, for the Jewish people, and for the world. Amen.
All the way from Stanford University, we are very grateful that you flew out, and now he's heading to the airport to lead the great flock at Chabad at Stanford University. We are now very honored to be graced by the legendary cantor Chazan Yankel Lemmer, accompanied by Rabbi Daniel Berry. The Alter Rebbe writes that music is the pen of the soul. And with that, please welcome and greet Chazan Yankel Lemmer.
Let's make this into a fun record, yes? You can join me with this, please. Anim Zmiras HaKoitzim. Okay, so the two languages that you hear a lot in Chabad are every language, but Yiddish and Russian, right? So we'll sing something in Yiddish and Russian. The story goes as follows. A chassid wrote a letter to the Rebbe. The song. This song has two names, either a pintele or a brief zum Rebbe. A pintele means the period at the end of a sentence. A brief zum Rebbe, a letter to the Rebbe. The letter, the story is about two letters. This chassid first writes a letter, and it says, oi, 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 dot, dot, dot. I have no parnasa, a pintele, another dot, another period. And my wife, she's not healthy now, dot. But you're the big Rebbe, help me please. And the next letter is identical, with a tiny little change. The parnasa, okay, not so bad anymore. The vibe, she's feeling better, That's the end. It brings out the closeness of a chassid to the Rebbe and how they understand each other with these little, even a little pintale in a letter. The Rebbe understands the chassid and the chassid knows what to write to the Rebbe. A pintale. Mogilowski gobernio a pintale do